Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 88 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. Since this is the last episode of May, it's time for me to shout out my patrons. We've reached 12 patrons as John Breen joins the crew. My sincere thanks goes out to him, as well as my other patrons, Denise Bennick, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Forrest Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, Matthew Saint, and Utuk Zul. Remember, it's just $1 per month to join in and get this monthly shoutout, as well as full scripts and audio outtakes. Now, on to the show. You may have noticed that the great majority of recent episodes have been centered around Marvel characters, including this week's show, and that trend will continue into June and July as I cover the Disney Plus Loki show. But I do have a special DC-related project releasing next month that I'll give more details on soon. And if you want to hear more about DC, Image, Dark Horse, or any other comic book company out there, make sure to get your questions in, as that's the biggest influence on the topics I cover. Those can be sent to welcome2geektown, all spelled out, at gmail.com. Or you can click the submit a question link on the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com. Now, getting on to this week's episode. Thanks to the recent trailer for Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings, Tiffany T wanted some background on the title character. To which I said, of course. Before we even get started on his history, there's one interesting thing to note about Shang-Chi up front, which is his name. Unlike the great majority of superheroes out there, Shang-Chi does not go by an alias or codename. Shang-Chi is the name he was born with, and that's the name he is called everywhere he goes. And that is how it's pronounced, although I pronounced it as Shang-Chi for quite a number of years before learning its correct pronunciation. Now, let's start at the beginning of his story, which is how he was originally created. In the early 1970s, Marvel was looking to do a licensed comic based on the popular TV show Kung Fu, starring David Carradine. However, the show was owned by Warner Brothers, which by this point also owned DC Comics, and so the studio refused to make a deal with Marvel. But, undeterred and wanting to take advantage of the martial arts trend in North America, thanks to Bruce Lee and others, Marvel found a different property to license in order to create a Kung Fu-inspired comic. That property was the Sax Rohmer creation, Fu Manchu. For those unaware of the character, beyond possibly the facial hair named for him, Fu Manchu was created in the 1910s as a villainous mastermind, appearing in over a dozen books from the original author and another half-dozen authorized continuations. The character was also portrayed on screen in various mystery/thriller films between 1923 and 1969, with some well-known actors filling the role, including Boris Karloff, John Carradine, and Christopher Lee. Peter Sellers brought the character back to the screen in 1980 for comedic purposes, and he was briefly seen in one of the fake trailers created for Grindhouse, played by an uncredited Nicolas Cage. You'll notice none of the actors I've mentioned are Asian, despite Fu Manchu being Chinese. This is one of a couple of recurring issues with the character. Yellowface, the casting of white actors as Asian characters and putting them in Asian makeup, was an unfortunate practice in Hollywood that thankfully seems to have almost entirely disappeared, although not completely yet, so there is still work left to do on that front. The larger issue with Fu Manchu is that his popularity helped spread a stereotypical and racist depiction of Asians that can persist even to this day. As we've seen recently, anti-Asian sentiment is still a problem in this country, and characters such as Fu Manchu were part of the early yellow peril attitude that stoked some of the fear and aggression towards Chinese and other Asians in the West. So, how do we get from the problematic, villainous Fu Manchu to the heroic Shang-Chi? Well, first appearing in Marvel Special Edition number 15, written by Steve Englehart and drawn by Jim Starlin, Shang-Chi was the son of the would-be world beater, who specifically chose a white American woman to breed with to produce this heir, and was trained from a very young age in the martial arts. Shang-Chi was raised to believe his father was a benevolent man, but learned the truth when he was sent on a mission to London in order to assassinate Dr. James Petrie, a recurring character from the Fu Manchu novels, one of many such characters who were brought over into the comics from the original books. Shang-Chi discovered Dr. Petrie was not the threat to world peace that his father had led him to believe, and started working with a team, mostly made up of other Sax Rohmer characters from the Fu Manchu books, in order to thwart his dad's plans and schemes, often fighting half-brothers and sisters still under the thumb of their shared father. Marvel Special Edition was quickly renamed to The Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, and the book continued for over 100 issues until its cancellation in 1983, as well as making regular appearances in the black and white magazine-sized book titled Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. Near the end of his first title, Shang-Chi retired to a life of a peaceful fisherman, shortly after Fu Manchu was apparently defeated and killed. Of course, comic book characters rarely stay inactive for long, and Shang-Chi returned just a few years later, appearing in anthology books like Marvel Comics Presents and one-shots, as well as guest starring in other books. With the rights to Fu Manchu and the related characters originally created by Sax Rohmer no longer held by Marvel, Shang-Chi's supporting cast has been mostly swept aside, and his parentage was at first mostly ignored, but then retconned. In 2010, writer Ed Brubaker gave us the explanation that Shang-Chi's father is an immortal sorcerer named Zheng Zhu, and that Fu Manchu was simply one of many aliases he had used over the years. Zheng Zhu, as he's now known in the comics, has been brought back from death a few times, but his demise at the end of this story seems to have stuck, at least for the last 10 years or so. Although he's been mostly relegated to guest star status, Shang-Chi has been on a number of teams over the years, including the Heroes for Hire, the Avengers, and most recently the Agents of Atlas, the newer version made up entirely of characters of Asian descent that I've mentioned in previous episodes. In addition to fighting crime on his own and as part of these various teams, Shang-Chi is also a trainer of heroes in hand-to-hand combat. At one time or another, his students have included Spider-Man, Captain America, Wolverine, and Domino, the last of which he also briefly entered into a romantic relationship with. Despite having no actual superpowers of his own, except in a few stories where he temporarily receives some, he's still considered to be one of the greatest fighters in the entire Marvel Universe, with even the god of war Ares acknowledging his skills. Recently, Shang-Chi has finished up a miniseries that will now be leading into a new ongoing series, written by Jean Luen Yang and drawn by D.K. Ruan. At the end of the miniseries, Shang-Chi was declared the new leader of his father's organization, named the Five Weapons Society, by the ghost of Zhang Zhu himself. Shang-Chi reluctantly has agreed to this, hoping to use the power of the society to better the world. Although his father's spirit visited him and told the martial arts hero that he is destined to become like Zhang Zhu and turn evil. Most likely the overarching story of the series will be Shang-Chi's fighting against the corruption that power of this nature brings. From what I've read, the first story arc will guest star a number of Marvel heroes in order to better illustrate Shang-Chi's new status quo and show what the Marvel Universe characters think of the hero and his current role. So, how much of this story will be translated directly into the movie coming out later this year? Well, we know some of the basics will be there, as Shang-Chi will be a martial artist who is trying to live a normal life in San Francisco after leaving his father's organization. However, his father has been changed, probably both to leave behind some of the more problematic aspects of his history, as well as fit him in more tightly into the already given history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Instead of being Fu Manchu, or the more recent retcon of Zhang Zhu, Shang-Chi's father has been named Wenwu in the movie, and also has the title of the Mandarin, a villain name you may recall from Iron Man 3. In that film, it was revealed that the Mandarin was simply a myth that Aldrich Killian used and hired actor Trevor Slattery to portray. However, in the Marvel one-shot titled All Hail the King, available on the Thor the Dark World DVD/Blu-ray and easily found online, we find out that there is a real Mandarin who was not happy about his name being used by the imposter. Related to this, the Ten Rings terrorist organization introduced in the first MCU movie Iron Man is apparently run by the Mandarin. In the comics, the Mandarin, a long-standing Iron Man foe whose creation was obviously influenced by Fu Manchu himself, wears 10 magical rings, each with a singular ability, including beams of ice, lightning and heat, and even more powerful effects like rearranging matter itself. We don't yet know if these mystical artifacts will be represented with these powers in the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings movie, but with that title, the rings obviously will play some important role in the plot, whether their power is literal or more symbolic. Well, Tiffany, and everyone else listening, that should give you a basic rundown of Shang-Chi. With actor/stunt performer Simu Liu portraying the title role in the upcoming movie, I expect we're going to see some great kung fu action. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, if anything I've talked about this episode inspired a question from you, or you just want to comment on the show in general, I'd be happy to hear from you. Feel free to send any and all comments and questions via email to welcome2geektown@gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.